lounging, son.
Everyone, welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan, and today we got another holiday-themed comic book to talk about, Batman Noel, by the great Lee Bermejo. You know his work from Lex Luthor, Joker, Batman Damned, you know, countless covers that he's done. He's currently working on the Detective Comics B covers that are coming out, and they're phenomenal. I love his take on Batman, and I actually never read this particular story until, just a couple days ago. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. It wasn't quite what I expected, to see in this comic. I don't even know what I was expecting. I made sure not to read too much into the plot. I just knew that Lee Bermejo illustrated it. I think I even thought Azzarello was the one that wrote it, but Lee Bermejo did all of it. He wrote and drew the book. Very excited to share this with you guys. It's definitely a cool take on an old Christmas story, and we'll get into like which Christmas story this kind of parallels right now. We got a little quote from Charles Dickens. That's a little clue as to what story that this is, I would say, inspired by. And even right here, it tells you it is a Christmas carol. Tells a Christmas carol of a different sort. And getting to find out, so like I said, story and art by Lee Bermejo, colors by Barbara Ciardo, letters by Todd Klein, and there's a foreword by Jim Lee. Little note here with respect to Charles Dickens. So, one thing that I love about Lee Bermejo's art, which is very evident in here, is he has a painted style. It's very detailed. You can feel the griminess of his Gotham City. You feel the dirtiness and the griminess and just the hopelessness that is Gotham City when Lee Bermejo is illustrating. We don't know who's narrating it right away, but it's somebody saying, it's a young boy talking about his dad. Right? And anybody that knows the Charles Dickens Christmas Carol story, it's Tiny Tim. Bob Cratchit works for Scrooge and just wants to be there, with his family on Christmas, but he ends up having to work. So, like I said, just the beautiful cityscapes that Lee Bermejo does, they're just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, all the detail, even putting in like the wall unit of the air conditioner inside that window. Right here, it says, for this story to make any sense, for it to mean anything, you have to believe in something very important. You have to believe people can change. There we finally see Batman make his appearance, landing on the roof. And I loved this, too, as we see him running, and there's snow on the roof. You hear the crunching sound, or onomatopoeia running across the page. And I could literally hear that sound of, like, the crunch of snow as you're running through it. Just such a beautiful, beautiful double page spread with the bat signal in the sky, the snow falling, and Batman jumping down into the alley. And this is where we meet our Bob Cratchit analog, who ends up being working for the Joker. We even see on the newspaper that the Joker has recently escaped, and as he's running, Batman is chasing him through the alley. He makes it to the Joker's hideout, but before he can go in there, we meet our Scrooge. And the Scrooge of this story is Batman. And I couldn't have foreseen that is where Bermejo was going to go with this. But I do think it's kind of interesting because Bruce is kind of a fucking Scrooge. He's rich, right? He's kind of a jerk, kind of an asshole to people. But it's how it relates. How he's the Scrooge in this story is a little bit different, right? This is a twist on A Christmas Carol. This is not a straight adaptation, just injecting in the characters of Gotham. So, as Batman runs up on Bob with this package full of money that he from the trash can that he was going to deliver to the Joker, Batman drops above, attacks Bob, and he wants to know where Joker is. Bob tells him he doesn't know. Batman lets him go. He plants a tracer on him, right? And he's using him as bait to capture the Joker. He doesn't care that he's got a kid. And it's kind of a little uncharacteristic of Batman, but at the same time, like kind of in line. Like all his mission is to stop crime and save Gotham, right? And as he's running home, we see Batman kicking the door in of the building that Bob was running outside of. And Joker left him a note saying he's too late. And this is where we meet the Tiny Tim character of the story. Lives in a shabby apartment, and much like the original Tiny Tim, he's in bad health. Look, I mean, even the Christmas tree he's using, it has made ornaments from a beer can, a beer bottle, and a toy soldier. And Bob is so terrified of Joker that he snaps at his kid, really hitting home like how like hopeless they are. The apartment's falling apart. I mean, look at this tree for stuff he got from a dumpster. And he even even says he wants to put Batman on there too. And Bob's like, "Why would you want to do that?" You know what I mean? He's not Christmassy. And this is where this is like how it's correlating. He's the Scrooge. He's got the big house, fancy cars. He had more money than he knew what to do with. He's, as Bruce is here, he's got a little bit of a cold, kind of, you know, much in the same way we saw Scrooge, or in the countless movies or in the book, like he's kind of sickly and old and stuff. So like, this is kind of making Bruce look a little weak, where we don't normally see him in that light. He's usually very strong. He doesn't get sick. He's immortal without being immortal. You know what I mean? Like Alfred's telling him, he needs to take the night off. He's like, I'm not sick. It's just the change in temperature. And he says it's impossible for the Dark Knight to get the sniffles. And Bruce is telling him his plan, and he's like, How could you do that? Why would you do this? This guy's got a child, and he says they all have children, and he's basically saying like his child could basically follow in the same footsteps. So he doesn't see it as really too much putting this guy at risk. This kid could be walking the same streets with a gun in his belt, just like his dad. I really love the layout that he has. I love his depiction of Bruce. He's sweating. He's clearly sick, and he's fighting it. And we see all the old versions of the Batman costume. See Robin, and he talks about how let's not forget there was another boy whose future was risked on his watch, and he's referring to Robin in this world. It doesn't say whether it's Dick or Jason. I'm assuming it's Jason Todd, but this Robin has died. And then we get the flashbacks of a better time when he was less angry and less Scrooge like, and much like we saw, or much like they say in A Christmas Carol, like Scrooge wasn't always an asshole. He wasn't always an old codger, that was just mean and didn't care about anybody. And that's how we're seeing Bruce is kind of in the same way. He's been hardened by the loss of Robin, and he's not as, I wouldn't say he was kind back then, but he's a little bit rougher than he was. And much like in A Christmas Carol, we get the ghosts of past, present, and future, and he gets a little bit of a vision, and it's a ghost from his past giving him a message for the future, realizing he has to change before it's too late. As he's trying to track down the Joker, he follows a bat signal. He meets up with Commissioner Gordon, telling him that there was an anonymous tip. A certain cat burglar, who we all know as Catwoman, is stealing it at an auction, but he doesn't really care because he's more worried about getting the homicidal maniac off the streets. Springs, which is classic Batman artist, and as he goes to confront Catwoman, Batman discovers, like just as he suspected, she was lying and only called him so she could play with him under the nostalgia of their adventures together. Love his take on Catwoman too. I mean, he perfectly gets this like rubbery latex material, reminding him of the times they used to play and how he used to be different, and how much he's changed over time. And he tells her he was never playing, and he doesn't think it's a game, and she proceeds to run from him, and we get this flashback, which I absolutely love. We see all classic Robin. We see the old villains there, and I love his take. I would love to see him, much like he did a Joker in Lex Luthor book. I kind of want to see a Two-Face. I think that would be pretty dope. And he continues to chase her. He falls off. And as he's falling down, I love how the page break, the panel break, we see, Batman's origin, which we all know. We don't need it to be retread. But it's kind of cool that he's landing in the alley where his parents were killed. And he's waiting for the next vision. What's next? What's going to come next? And Ghost of Present is Superman. And such a huge contrast in terms of everything else in this book being very muted, very dark. We see this bright, glowing Superman and tells him, like, you're in no condition to be out here. You've got pneumonia. You need to go home. And he said, he'll leave the medical advice to the professionals. Isn't there somewhere else you can be? And he says, come on, let me give you a lift to your car under one condition. And they go watch Bob and Tim. And I love this line where he said, isn't it bad form for a hunter to use parents or children as bait? And he says, justice comes at a price, and he'll do anything to stop the Joker. That if Bob gets thrown in jail, he'll scare the little boy, so he'll never dare follow in his father's footsteps. And Superman flies Batman around as the rest of the Gothamites are preparing for Christmas, and Batman's not the sentimental type, so he doesn't really give a shit what Superman's saying. He said he just wants to stop the Joker, and then he sees Commissioner Gordon, and he tells Superman to hold on. Commissioner Gordon and one of the officers talk about their differing opinions of Batman, and how the cop says he's in a serial, but Gordon's like, no, he's make no mistake, he's not evil. He just walks the fine line. And Gordon even says, he wonders, like, what if he goes too far? And Superman drops Batman off at the Batmobile, telling him to feel better. Bomb goes off, and we see the shadowy figure walking up, and we all know who that's going to be. It's the Joker. He drags him through this graveyard, and I'm telling you, the detail that he puts in his art is amazing. I love the fact that this is a take on A Christmas Carol. It's a very unique Batman story. Not something that you would expect in a Batman comic, to have these two stories mashing together. And then seeing Bruce, coming to this realization, like, what could happen in the future if he's not around and if he goes too far. And we see the chaos in the streets, right? Seeing Gordon being hauled off to jail, seeing for being an accomplice to Batman, seeing Alfred selling off all of Bruce's stuff. And what a great line. Sometimes it takes dying to teach a fellow how to live. And then we get, obviously the story's going to end on a relatively happy note. Batman races to stop the Joker. The Joker, absolutely terrifying as he's coming to get his money from Bob. And right as Joker's about to kill Bob, we see Batman break through, stops the Joker. Bob picks up the gun and is about to shoot him. And we see something, like, we see the change. We see, much like we've seen the change in Scrooge when it comes to A Christmas Carol. Batman says something that's kind of like we weren't going to expect, right? He says, "You're not a criminal. Show your son the kind of man you are." And he decides not to shoot Joker. Joker gets arrested, goes to jail. We leave with Batman in the cave, getting rest, and he does something nice. He makes sure that Bob and Tim have a Christmas tree, pays him back with a raise, benefits, 401k, everything, right? And we get the happy ending that we don't always get in a Batman comic, and we leave off with Bob asking him, and he's an employee at Wayne Enterprise. He asked him, "So what do you think the moral of the story is?" Get some sketches, some process work by Bermejo. Like I said, this was I had always meant to read the story, never picked it up. Really glad that I was able to check this out for the first time. I love the idea of taking A Christmas Carol, putting a spin on it in Gotham. Definitely unexpected. If you would have told me this was a mashup, I don't even think that I would have correlated making Bruce Scrooge in this instance. But it's really cool, the parallels of a Bruce Wayne to a Scrooge, and seeing all these different and seeing and being able to show like a growth within him, that kind of took him out of the darkness. Because, like I said, like in the comic books, when Jason Todd dies, he does get very dark, and he goes to this dark place, and kind of cool to see him kind of get a little bit of light back in his life. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm loving going through these holiday comics. If you haven't checked out the other episodes, make sure you check them out. Make sure you, and if you're not, also make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Comic Lounge. Throw your comments or suggestions down below, or you can email us, thecomicloungepod@gmail.com. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you're notified every time a new episode goes up. We're available on YouTube, Podbean, Spotify, and iTunes. And on that note, I'm out.